Hello. Okay, is everybody ready? Good, hello, welcome. Okay, quiet there at the back. Welcome to DCB today. Do we have any, actually no, we don't have any fire alarms planned today, so if the fire alarm does go off, then it's down the ramp to the end safely and quietly and sensibly. Do we have any apologies for absence today?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Breckles, Ali and Hunchen, and I note that Councillor Windows is not yet here.
Thank you very much, that's rather disappointing. Do we have any declarations of interest? Sarah?
Yeah, just to note that I took part in one of the consultation sessions on the MSHED were running on the statue thing. So nestled within the 14,000 responses that they've had is probably a personal opinion of mine, but obviously I'm here today in capacity as a councillor with a neutral opinion and an open mind to make a decision within planning considerations.
Thank you very much. I think quite a lot of us are in the same boat. Simone, were you going to tell us give us any particular advice on possible free determination in expansion of the email that you sent? Or?
Not necessarily, no. There was no request for further advice, but just to say I did email around a link to remind everybody basically of the advice contained in the code for members, which makes it very clear, you know, where the boundary lies between predetermination and just having been involved previously. And the key thing is about keeping an open mind. And
Yep, good. Thank you very much. I think I'm in the same boat as you, and also I'm the local ward councillor where the statue is as well, so that's my also interest. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, are they agreed as a correct record? Guy?
Apologies, Chair. Something caught my eye yesterday that I would really like to check, if that's okay, just before. It's not a huge thing, but just to begging the committee's indulgence, it would put my mind at ease if I could just go and check the official record, and then I'd feel completely comfortable. If we'd be okay to bump them to the next meeting, that would be much appreciated.
Okay, that sounds fine to me. All agreed with everybody else? Okay, great. We can bring those back to the next meeting in April. Okay, action sheet. I don't think we have any actions to report, do we? No. Appeals. Does anybody have any question related to appeals? No? Good. Anybody got any questions about enforcement? Nope. That's also great. We're going speedily along. Okay. So then we'll move on to the substantive item. We have two members of items of public forum statement, but neither of them have attended to speak them. I'm assuming both over there in the gallery are not intending to speak? Nope. Fantastic. Okay, in which case we will move on to the officer presentation, which you've been emailed earlier today. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for listed building consent for a proposal to move the statue of Edward Colston from Colston Avenue to the MSHED. The statue and plinth together form a building that is listed at grade 2. The applicant for this application is the City Council, and the application has not been referred to committee by a ward member. The Colston Avenue location is shown on the left of this slide, and the MSHED location is shown on the right. The applicant has provided a summary of events leading up to the submission of this application. On the 7th of June 2020, the statue of Edward Colston was pulled down from its plinth on Colston Avenue during a Black Lives Matter protest and rolled into the harbour. The statue was recovered from the harbour and in the summer of 2021 went on display in the MSHED Museum. While on display, the History Commission, which had been established following the events in June, ran a public consultation. This consultation asked people what should now happen to the statue and plinth. 80% of respondents from Bristol agreed that the statue should be displayed in a museum. and 70% of respondents from Bristol agreed that a new plaque should be added to the plinth. The results of this consultation process informed a report by the Commission that concluded with 6 recommendations for the future of the statue and plinth, and this application seeks to implement a number of those recommendations, and these are set out in the officer report, with the key one being to move the statue to the M shed so it can be put on display. Also associated with this proposal is the addition of a new plaque on the plinth, and this is shown on the image. So this would be at the base of the plinth. And this would briefly and also factually explain when and why the statue was put down, when and why it was put up and taken down. The suggested wording for this plaque is also set out in the application and included within the officer report. A consultation has also been undertaken in the normal way on this application for listed building consent, and this has involved the display of a site notice and also a press advert. There have now been a total of 5 responses, and this includes 3 objections, which includes 1 late objection received this afternoon, 1 neutral comment, and also a comment that is in support. A summary of these responses can be read in the officer report and are available to view in full on Planning Online. However, the main issues raised are as follows. With regard to the objections, an objection has been received on the basis that the statue being put on display at the M shed would be offensive. There are also concerns that the proposal would reward what one objector has termed a heritage crime and an act of vandalism. The representation that's been received this afternoon is also essentially on this ground and states that the statue should be restored and replaced upon the plinth. It's also been commented that pre-toppling, the council had a retain and explain proposal with planning permission granted. Related to this, there are also concerns that the survey was flawed and also an objection with regard to the proposed wording of the plaque. Moving on to the neutral comment, this is a request for a condition regarding the design of the plaque. And the comment of support is on the grounds that the proposal is one that meets with widespread approval from those who responded in their thousands to the consultation in 2021. Moving on now to cover the responses from consultees. Historic England haven't objected to the proposals. However, they do consider that the proposal would cause a high degree of harm to the listed ensemble of the plinth and the statue, and that this would be substantial within the language of the MPPF. They consider that it will be for the decision maker to decide whether the proposals would deliver substantial public benefits sufficient to outweigh the substantial harm. They do, however, recognise that the Council, through the History Commission, has undertaken a wide-ranging appraisal of the sentiment of Bristolians towards the future of the statue. A comment has also been received from the Council's conservation team. They also do not object. However, they've assessed the harm at the lower level of less than substantial harm, and essentially they appear to have placed more emphasis on the extent to which the events of June 2020 have affected the historic significance of the asset. And they consider that the public benefits would outweigh the harm posed and have also recommended conditions. Here is a photo of the plinth, and I'll now move on to cover the assessment. So this is an application for listed building consent, and it must be assessed in accordance with the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. Local and national planning policies must also be taken account in undertaking this assessment. These requirements are set out in the officer report, and it should also be noted that the references to harm throughout this assessment are in relation to the terms in the MPPF. In terms of the significance of the asset, analysis has been undertaken by the applicant, and it's also been addressed in the comments that have been received from consultees. And important aspects relating to significance are considered to be in terms of artistic and historic interest. Regard must also be had to the MPPF, which at paragraph 202 states, where there is evidence of deliberate neglect of or damage to a heritage asset, the deteriorated state of the heritage asset should not be taken into account in any decision. As Conservation note, however, this creates something of a paradox, where a degree of historic significance of the asset may now arise from its effective separation. The local planning authority must also give great weight to the asset's conservation. Considering the applicant's submission and also the comments from consultees, officers consider on balance that the proposals would pose less than substantial harm to the heritage asset. And because all of the public benefits, which I will go on to cover, could only be achieved through the removal of the statue to a secure public collection, there is also considered to be clear and convincing justification for this harm. So where works would lead to less than substantial harm, that harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, and this is the test that is required by the MPPF at paragraph 208. In terms of the public benefits, these are considered to be as follows. The approach is the result of an extensive citywide consultation, which is set out in the report by the History Commission. The results of this consultation and also the recommendations have informed the applicant's proposals, and this is considered to meet the expectations of the written ministerial statement in terms of consulting with communities. The applicant also submits that any reinstatement of the statue would cause additional upset and disgust and potentially lead to further public order and health and safety risks, as well as damaging community cohesion. In addition, the placing of the statue in the care of the M Shed will ensure its long-term preservation. This will enable the display of the statue with accompanying contextual information following the History Commission's recommendations. The new plaque would also provide opportunity for interpreting contested heritage through the retention and contextualisation of the plinth. Paragraph 204 of the MPPF requires the local planning authority to have regard to the importance of retaining statues in situ and explaining their historic and social context rather than removal. Regard should therefore be had to this. However, as set out in the report, the proposals are considered to be acceptable in this instance, and there would be substantial public benefits which would weigh in favour of granting consent. The proposal is considered to be in accordance also with paragraph 195 of the MPPF, which states that heritage assets are an irreplaceable resource and should be conserved in a manner appropriate to their significance, so that they can be enjoyed for their contribution to the quality of life of existing and future generations. So the recommendation is therefore to grant listed building consent, subject to the conditions that are set out in the officer report, which include conditions relating to the future of the statue and the implementation of the plaque.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any questions about this? And just to say, Chris, unfortunately, because you just missed the beginning of the presentation, you'll actually be excluded from taking part in the debate and the voting on this item, unfortunately.
Up to date on the situation and the planning aspects of it.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that, but the rules are fairly clear, aren't they, around that? Or can we be respectful? I think if you're desperate to take part in the debate, I'll let you do that, and then hopefully the votes won't be controversial in any way, so that it'll be a particular issue around the voting. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something, and I am being a bit woolly because I'm not very well. So, page 45, recommendation for decision, just that bit, it just says we recommend the following: that listed building consent is granted. So, are we saying that it's not listed building? The statue and the plinth, or the plinth is and the statue isn't? I wasn't sure, because if you're asking for consent for it to be granted that status, I'm assuming it doesn't have that status at the moment. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, so the situation in terms of the current position is that whilst the statue isn't in situ, it is still technically part of the listed building, and that's really the starting point for the assessment. So essentially, if this listed building consent is granted this evening, then that would essentially sort of regularise the situation with regards to the separation of the statue from the plinth.
So, Chair, so when the statue was on top of this plinth, it was listed at that point. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then once the statue was removed from the plinth, it lost its citizenship. Sorry.
No, it is still listed today.
Status.
It is still listed today, hence the need for the listed building consent application.
So to clarify, so the plinth itself will still be listed. Will the statue itself still be listed, but with its listed status living elsewhere, or will the statue just entirely stop being listed, I think is the question.
Apologies for cutting you off there. Once listed building consent is granted, the statue will essentially no longer form part of the listed building. So in order to qualify as a listed building, something needs to be a building and on the list. So through the granting of this consent and the statue no longer being part of that, it will no longer form part of that listing.
If I can just add to it, though, part of the requirement in order to be able to be listed, it needs to have an address. By entering the museum, it wouldn't have an address anymore. However, it therefore enters a different regulatory regime, so to speak. It will be part of a regulated collection, and therefore that's why it would not be listed anymore, but it would be well cared for as part of this collection. And hence what you're deciding on is by delisting the statue, it enters the collection.
Yeah, and then I guess the statue could stay forever in the M shed or move to other locations potentially in the future. It's not connected. It doesn't have to stay in the M shed. It can move to a different museum.
It could potentially be moved to a different museum, but it would still be in the care of that collection. And I suppose if that was something that, that would worry you, that could potentially be something to be considered as well under conditions.
Yeah, it doesn't worry me. I'm personally kind of pondering the sort of hopeful creation of a museum to slavery, and maybe it might be something that would be appropriate to include in that. So just whether or not this permission would allow that to be something that could happen easily, for example.
As I said, once the statue enters the collections, then it's in the care of the museum to deal with it, and under those regulations, which would allow it to move it to a different place, unless you condition something different. I suppose that would be possible.
Yeah, which I can't. Guy, is that, or Lorraine? Did that answer your question, Lorraine? No.
It's just completely blown my mind, sorry.
Yeah, I didn't think I was confused. Now I feel very confused. Is it the case that the statue is currently listed?
That's what
Right. So in other words, hearing that we're going through now, in effect, is to relist it differently, or is it to remove its listed status completely?
It is to remove the listing of the statue so that it can enter the collection of the museum.
Right.
Fine.
So we
And the plinth would remain listed.
Gotcha. So in other words, the conditions that we're talking about in relation to the plaque refer solely to the plinth. As in, the statue simply becomes a capital asset, in effect. It's just something the council owns, but doesn't have any special status beyond that, in planning terms at least.
Correct, but it is still part of the collection and needs to be cared for under the regulations of those of how the museums need to look after what's in their collection. And it would still be part of this listed building application.
Sorry, Chair. I really am not being awkward. What in the museum at the moment are all the displays, artifacts or whatever, listed? No.
None of
But they're
the items
protected.
in collections can be listed because they're movable items, and
Yeah.
movable items cannot be listed.
So if the statue stays where it is, then what you're saying is that at the moment it was listed when it was on the plinth. For it to move into the museum, it then just forms part of the museum's collection. Is that what we're technically saying? And that's thrown me. Is that what we're really saying? That we need to give it permission to go to be in the M shed, basically.
I think what we're doing is, so the statue on top of the plinth was all listed
Yes,
together.
I understand that.
The statue is no longer on the plinth,
Yeah.
but is technically still listed even though it's not on the plinth.
Right.
So what we're doing is separating out
Plinth.
the plinth and the statue.
Right.
The plinth will still be listed. The statue will not be listed. That means it can then go and become part of the museum collection and exhibit on display in the M shed at the moment, maybe in other places. Like a usual museum collection item. So
I get that now. So that page 45, under we recommend the following, that listed building consent thing is misdirected me, or is that talking about the plinth?
it's part of what's causing the confusion, that the part of the officer presentation a minute ago had the location on the plinth and then also the M shed, as I think it kind of comes across slightly as if we're moving the listed building status of it from the plinth to the museum. I think that's possibly where the confusion is.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, if it helps, if I can just talk about the conditions, because condition 3 that's recommended requires confirmation to be provided to the local planning authority that the statue has been entered formally as an accessioned artefact. So my understanding is that's essentially the museum kind of formally receiving this and giving it their kind of status. And then also condition 4 requires details to be provided, again, around the display and interpretation, again, in order that the planning authority can be satisfied that the public benefits will be secured.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? Leslie, I can see your light on. Did you have a question? No. Your light is on though, I think, or someone's light. No. That's your, it's your mouse. I can see a red flashing light. Okay, does anybody have any more questions? Is that clear? Guy.
I suppose my query is, in terms of the conditions as recommended in the officer's report that pertain to public benefit, obviously public benefit's quite a subjective thing, potentially. What I'm wondering is, under what pressure is the council, is the applicant, let's say, proposing, it's not the applicant, is it? Apologies. It's the planning authority recommending the conditions in the report are in response to what representations? I suppose is what I'm asking. Who is saying that it is in the public benefit to condition this course of action into the planning consent? Is this not something that could just be done as a matter of council strategy? Is it necessary, reasonable and proportionate to the public benefit to have those conditions laid out in planning terms? Could that not just be a decision of the authority?
So I think in terms of the recommendation, really, officers have really tried to just strike an appropriate balance between ensuring that, as far as the planning assessment's concerned, we have confidence that really the public benefits that are contained with the application are secured, but also not being overly prescriptive and allowing the museum to also display and provide the interpretation as they see fit. And obviously sort of changes of circumstances may happen in the future again, and
that was, I think you've got to the nub of my question or my line of inquiry, which is in the future, how much of what we do today binds us? I can very easily imagine that had this planning committee taken place 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have been a very different conversation. And I'm just wondering what that conversation might be like in 5 years or 10 years. Are we tying the hands of a future authority? Are we potentially tying the hands of a future administration of the council to sort of continue to, I suppose, strike that balance in this way?
I mean, a future council administration could always come back and seek the variation of any of the conditions if they felt it bound them too far, and then a debate would have to be had. But like Jonathan has explained, like with any other decision as well, it's around. If we put a lot of weight, basically, on the public benefit being derived from the display in the museum, we need to have sufficient confidence that that's actually going to happen, and hence why we're seeking to secure it through a condition.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Good. Okay. Would anybody like to share an opinion on this application of any variety? No? Well, I can kick us off if you like. I'm very glad that you brought it to planning committee, because I think it's quite good for transparency to have it come via the sort of democratic forum. And I think it's sort of to respond to some of the objections to it. History and art is not static, is it? It's a movable, changeable concept, and whilst there might have been no plan once to deal with it, history has overtaken it, and I think this is a very appropriate response to the toppling of it, and I'm very glad to see it. And although I do hope that one day in the not too far distant future we can see a museum to those who've been harmed by slavery rather than those that have been profiting from it. So hopefully that will find its resting place in there eventually. So thank you. Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask two questions. The recommendations, is that page 56? That's just to clarify, please. Is that page 56? What we're ruling on?
Sorry, I didn't have the agenda with the page numbers up, and I do. Yeah, so the recommendation is as set out at the bottom.
56.
Yeah, page 56, and then also on the next page, so page 57 as well.
Okay, so my second... Oh, hold on. So my second sorry, thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to double check so so I've got no attachment to this statue at all. I mean, crikey. But in regards to the proposed plaque, who made that decision? Sorry, just like, was whose decision, and what does it say? Sorry, I've been frenetically trying to find the statement. What is it being proposed to go on to it? Because it almost seems like it's like a decision made, and that's what's going to go on there. So who made that decision to write on it, the plaque?
So in terms of the wording of the plaque that's proposed, that is within the officer report, and it's on page 53.
Right.
Towards the bottom there.
Okay.
This wording is as recommended by the History Commission. It is, a factual explanation, essentially, as you'll see. And, there is a condition, again, recommended just regarding the details of this plaque.
And then, sorry, last question, and I will shut up. And who designed the plaque, the new plaque?
In terms of the design, I mean, that will be, the applicant, the city council. But, we don't actually have those kind of detailed details yet, which is why we've recommended a condition. But as was shown on the image in the presentation, they have identified the location for that, and we do have some dimensions that are quoted out in terms of the size of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Leslie?
Well, it's a shame that it was ever pulled off its plinth, but in the circumstances, I think the museum is probably the best place for it in the current time, because hopefully it won't attract the attention, and it would keep most people happy. I think the museum is the best place, because otherwise it's a red flag to a bull if it goes back up on the plinth. It might be that in the future people aren't so hot-headed about it and it can go back on the plinth, but that might be wishful thinking.
Yes, I hope it won't go back up. Guy?
Thank you. To voice disagreement with my colleague from the opposite bench, I'm very glad it's down. I'm sorry it wasn't gone sooner. I hope it never goes back up. I think it's better for the city that it's gone. My only regret is that it wasn't done sooner, and that I do have reservations that the plaque, in attempting to strike a balance, nonetheless refers to him as a benefactor. Even placing it in historical context, still an extent to which it can't help but elevate the reputation sort of historically. I don't think it is possible to explain the historical context in a way that would be suitable for public display. It refers to the enslavement of people, not the murder of people, not the torture of people. It's very hard to think what you could put on the side of that plinth that would adequately represent the context that would be suitable for the public to read. My view at this point is that the public benefit of the application in front of us sits entirely in its removal. I appreciate that there is a strong argument for its use as an educational tool, and I wish people the best in using it as such, if that's what the city wants to do. My concern is that by seeking to strike a balance with the conditions as recommended, is that we do in some way tie the council's hands. As it is, I would, with a degree of caution and scepticism, be happy to follow the officer's recommendation on this one, if it is the will of the committee. If there was a way of ensuring that it could never go back up, I would wholeheartedly support it. And if there was a way of perhaps ensuring that whilst loosening the conditions to enable the council to change the wording on that plaque in the future if it wished to do so, or to place it somewhere else if it wished to do so, I would be more than happy with that as well. My mind is somewhat put at ease by our head of planning's assurances that future applications could just as easily have it melted down. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
Thank you. In a slight change of pace for this week, I very much agree with my Green colleagues on this committee that, yes, I was incredibly glad when it came down, and I don't wish to see it ever go back up. I think it shouldn't have ever really been up in the first place. I fully support the move to MShed, and I share your hope that one day we have a dedicated museum for the enslavement of the Bristol's part in the enslavement of Africans and the trade, global trade. Yeah, I do have similar reservations about the plaque, and there is suggested wording, and I have a slight issue with the fact that it's listed that let me just bring up have a look at that the council kind of there needs to be a sort of consultation with the council, but it's not really listed who that final say goes to, and that would be a slight issue for me. Is there a way of rewording that condition so that we have some control over who has that final decision on that wording? Because I think the wording on the plinth is going to be incredibly important. I do think the suggestions do water down the history and do sort of gloss over some of the reasons why it was taken down, and the sort of public feeling behind that. So I would like to see far more the control over what's on the plinth put in place.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. I have no objection to the statue going into the MShed. I don't really care where it goes, to be fair, but that's fine. I'm not going to object to that at all. I think that's the best place for it. Then people can choose whether they see it or not. What I do have a problem with is where I started with the statement that's going to go on the new plaque, which I'm not happy about, is that within the 2 paragraphs on page 53, it doesn't represent my African heritage in any way, shape or size. All it says is, and it just kind of like a trigger back to school, because all it actually says is the enslavement of African people. That's what it says. Black Lives Matter is something that grew because of a specific incident, and it makes me feel a little bit wobbly just to see that enslavement of African people. That's the positive, and I think it's totally wholly inappropriate that of all the things we could say on it, I don't like that. And I agree with what Councillor Classic said about who's going to have the last say, who's going to give the nod to this, and I don't like that. So I don't know where that will sit in regards to me voting, because I am actually for staying in the museum and whatever the status thing, that's fine. But I do have a real issue with the new statue, whatever that looks like, and those statements. So I don't know how I'm going to be asked to vote, because that's going to be a bit of a dilemma if it's one sort of vote, or because I'm not going to vote for it if that stays. Okay. That's just totally wrong.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think Simone's got something helpful to interject at this point.
Yeah, so just to explain, in terms of how it is drafted at the moment, the condition, the wording would be signed off by planning officers, basically. But completely understand if you feel that's not appropriate, we could alternatively say for the wording to come back to this committee, you know, for approve it subject to the wording of that of the plaque to come back to this committee, and if equally if you want to be, you know, we would actually would be helpful, I would say, if suggestions are being made, what should be on that, you know, how it should be improved. If we can maybe do that by correspondence beforehand, but then for it to come back to the committee next time.
How would that be, Lorraine, for it to come back in the 10th of April is our next committee? Yeah. Thank you, Simone.
Simone, thank you, because as it stands, I'm voting. I would vote against it. So thank you. That's a good suggestion.
And thank you, Lorraine, for your points. It's very important. Sarah?
Yeah, just to say that, yeah, that satisfies me. I think it's just important that members of the public have, and councillors who represent citizens have that say, have the ability to have a say and input and that transparency on what's written on the plinth. I think that's just an important part of this process.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. I'd just like to say that it's my considered opinion, and always has been, that the correct place for the statue was on its original plinth. I don't believe in rewriting history or anything else. It worries me that it has to go somewhere safe, because I don't believe if it went back on the plinth, it's going to be safe at all. In fact, probably disappear within days. And I find that a terrible shame that the city that I was brought up in, won't say how many years ago, this would never have happened because people had respect. And it's unfortunate that respect seems to be a bad word, particularly in the Bristol area. So I believe it has to go with the museum and be safe, even though I believe it's an unfair decision. Well, I have to go with it.
What I would say in response to that, actually, is not rewriting history, Chris. It is shining a light on a truer history for more people. But it's not rewriting history in any way whatsoever. It's, Lorraine, I'll let you make the comment that I'm sure you would like to make.
I think that it is absolutely appalling, Councillor, with respect, that people being enslaved, people being killed, children being killed on boats that were crammed with thousands of peoples, that we had dead bodies everywhere, you know, because people were forced away from their home and their heritage to come to a country against their will. That is the issue. I don't want to get political about this, but I'm getting political about this. It's not about the statue being unsafe. It is about what the statue represents. So whether it goes on the plinth, whether it's in the museum, whether it goes back in the river, whether it stays in your backyard maybe, I think the issue is it's about slavery. It's about history. That's what it's about, Councillor, not about the statue not being safe. So I do apologise for being a little bit emotional about this. So are we going to vote? Because we need to move on.
Yes, we'll move on to a vote. Thank you very much, Lorraine. No, I'm not. Sorry, Chris. I'm not going to let you come back. No, I think it's better now, actually, Chris.
I'm not accepting that. She accused me of saying that slavery and killing of children and that the slavers were right. I've never said that. I do not believe that, and she will not accuse me of it. So
Okay. No, right.
With respect, Councillor, I did not accuse you of anything. I'm explaining the context.
Okay, colleagues.
If you want to say I've accused you, I will accept that, but I didn't say it.
Okay, Chris, okay, we are now going to move to a vote. I think this is the appropriate place to end this conversation now. We're going to move to a vote. Thank you very much for your remarks. Sarah, how would you like to vote?
In favour of the recommendations to, move it to the shed.
Yeah, oh yeah, so I've gotten ahead of myself because right, so I'm going to propose an officer recommendation with the condition that it comes back to committee on the 10th. So Lorraine's comments have made me feel very emotional as well. Can I have a seconder? Lorraine, would you like to second it? Yep. So Lorraine's going to second that. Okay, now we will move to a vote. Catching up with myself. Sarah, how would you like to vote?
4.
4. Lorraine?
4.
Guy?
4.
Leslie?
4.
Thank you. And Chris, you don't get a vote because you were late. You were late to the start of the item, so unfortunately you don't have a vote, just to be clear. And it's a for the officer recommendation for me, so it has passed. Thank you very much. I'd also like to express a desire that the plinth itself entirely comes to be removed at some point in the future as well. That would be what I would like to see. Guy, did you want to add something as well?
Just two quick things, if that's okay, Chair. One was to just make absolutely sure that my understanding was correct, that this is to come back to the next meeting of this committee on the date
on the 10th
currently
of
set
April.
for the next meeting.
I think what we're saying, what's coming back is the wording for the plinth. And I think it is helpful to say that otherwise the application's approved, because if...
Yeah. So it's, the application's been approved, with the condition being that the wording of the plaque on the plinth is going to come back to this committee on the 10th of April, which is our next committee, and we'll do some correspondence via email in advance of that to kind of thrash that out a little bit, which we can include the entire committee in that, I think, can't we? Rather than just Leeds.
I mean, it's to an extent up to you. Who you, if you wanted to delegate it to Leeds only and therefore expedite the matter, that would be another option.
Well, we could do, but I feel like, so Lorraine isn't, Councillor Francis isn't one of the leads, but I feel like her input would be vitally important on it. So I think opening it up to the entire committee would be the appropriate thing to do. Otherwise, it's an all-white Leeds group for a start.
I think the reason why I wanted to clarify that with the application being approved and it's only the wording of the plinth coming back is just so that it needn't hold up the display of the statue in the museum.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it's just the plinth wording that we're talking about. But yeah, we can be swift about it as well for our correspondence. Okay, everybody satisfied as much as can be? What's the other thing, Guy?
And the other was just to add a note of thanks to the officer. It was an extraordinary report given the level of sensitivity required and the complexity of the planning issues concerned, and making it coherent and legible. I thought it was one of the most impressive reports I've ever seen. So thank you to the officer.
Yeah, and I'd like to add as well for the History Commission and the other members of the council staff that worked on this, 2 of whom were over there. Thanks for your work. It's been a tough one. Thank you. Right, okay, so that's the end of this meeting. Let's draw it to a close and see you on the 10th of April. Thank you very much.